We are here at the Élysée Palace, but you will soon be leaving for Nancy to sign the Treaty of Friendship and Cooperation with Poland. France has already signed this type of treaty with Germany, Italy and Spain, but never with a non-bordering country. You talk about a history treaty. Why the treaty with Poland and why is it a historic one?
First of all, thank you for being at the Élysée Palace with me today. Thank you for your French. This is a historic treaty, as you said, because it's the first time since we had an agreement signed in 1991 by our predecessors at a historic moment for Poland. But ultimately, the terms had become obsolete. And that's normal. It spoke of possible accession one day to the European communities, etc. Now, more than 20 years after Polish accession to the European Union, at a time of extremely powerful geopolitical and geostrategic importance, this treaty marks a rapprochement between Poland and France on the economic, industrial, technological, energy and defense levels, and ultimately, it reflects a shared vision of our Europe. Beyond our bilateral relationship, that is to say, we both want a stronger Europe, a more independent Europe, a Europe that is aware that it is becoming and must become a geopolitical power. So all of this also takes place in a reality that has changed significantly. Poland has become a key player in our Europe because it has achieved tremendous economic success in recent decades, because it has also invested massively in its defense, and because it is at the forefront of Europe's security interests. Because our relationship has transformed. Our trade has more than doubled in the last 10 years. It is over 30 billion in bilateral trade. And France is a very large investor and employer in your country. And we are Poland's third largest export market. So this is the reality of a bilateral relationship that has changed the reality of Poland's position in Europe, which is much stronger. And then there's a shared view that we have with the Prime Minister Donald Tusk, on what we must do together in this Europe.
Precisely. We see that today Poland is a stable partner of France, but that hasn't always been the case. Have you had any harsh words about Poland? What does that mean to you today? Can this alliance be a strong friendship with Poland?
First of all, I have never had any harsh words for Poland, neither for the people nor for the country, because I always distinguish between leaders and nations. And I also know the fight the Polish people waged to be sovereign, to be free, and then to join the European adventure. Today, you have a Prime Minister who is convinced that Poland is indeed stronger in Europe, and I believe he is profoundly right. I share the same desire for France, and when we look at our geopolitics and our threats, we clearly see that today we have a Russian threat, a reality in Ukraine, destabilization in Moldova, Georgia and elsewhere. So it is at our doorstep and everyone is affected. Moreover, Poland is affected. And then we have a geopolitical and geo-economic conflict between major blocs, between China and the United States of America. Does Europe weaken us or strengthen us? I think it strengthens us. So sometimes Europe functions poorly. It's too fussy about rules. It imposes too many regulations. In these cases, it's our responsibility to say stop. That's what we're doing right now with Chancellor Merz, Prime Minister Tusk, and a few others. But it makes us stronger because it allows us to protect ourselves together. Remember, that was just yesterday, 4 years ago. There wouldn't have been a Europe. There wouldn't have been a vaccine. We wouldn't have a real strategy to deal with COVID. There wouldn't have been a Europe. We wouldn't have succeeded in issuing these loans on the market to revive our economies. And now, faced with all the challenges we face, we must act as Europeans. This is the only way to build technological independence, that is, to have semiconductors, to be competitive in artificial intelligence, to meet healthcare challenges, but also to have a stronger, more robust European defense force.
Exactly. That's one of the reasons why you're signing the treaty with Poland, which concerns, as you explained, many issues. But let's not hide it. Today, security is at the heart of Polish concerns, as we remember in particular the year 1939, when we signed agreements with other countries and our allies ultimately abandoned us. After Nancy, can you reassure that France will defend Poland if necessary?
Yes, because you're right. There's a history of the 20th century that divided Europe. First, because it must be said, part of Western Europe naively thought at the end of the 1930s that Nazi Germany could advance and that, ultimately, it wasn't in our interest. Then we woke up in 1940 and everything was conquered, except Spain, for reasons we know, and England for other geographical reasons. And we fought. We were celebrating the victory and the end of the war yesterday, but it lasted 5 long years. And the second betrayal came after the Second World War, when the Iron Curtain fell over Europe and Western Europeans allowed the Soviet Union to, in a way, absorb this Europe. So when we wake up in 1989 to 1990, there is a defiance in Central Europe. There's what Milan Kundera called a kidnapped West. And I believe it's this parenthesis that we're about to conclude. And I believe it very deeply. That is to say, deep down, there were different sentiments towards Russia. For a very long time, we didn't experience risk in the same way. I think that in February 2022, everyone was there saying to themselves, now we're convinced. We all agree, Russia is a clear, existential risk. And in March 2022, in Versailles, we held a European summit under the French presidency, and we all said we must build our strategic autonomy, and Russia is a risk. And the second thing is that in previous years, little by little, and I would say in recent months, we have all seen that the American ally, well, they said, first, my own interests, my agenda, which is China. Europe is perhaps no longer my priority. These are two things. Closing this parenthesis, so to speak, between these two betrayals. But they did happen. They were experienced as such in Poland. And then we reconciled. And so, what is important is that today we have to build military cooperation together within the framework of NATO, but also ad hoc through specific documents. We have to build joint programs together to rearm. And so, it's not simply that we have to increase our defense budget. This is what we have been doing since 2018. And Poland is one of the highest spending countries in Europe relative to its GDP, given the risks it faces. And today, we must build common solidarity, be able to invest together, be able to develop defense industries together, be able to intervene together, and be able to protect ourselves. And that is why, in the treaty we are signing, there is also this solidarity and the fact that, let's say that if Poland is attacked beyond what is provided for in Article 5 of NATO treaty or in the European Union treaties, well, in a way, with this bilateral treaty, we are making it operational.
As long as there are important security clauses in this treaty. But are there? It talks about a nuclear umbrella. Today, Europe is protected mainly by the American umbrella. You have already promised to extend this French deterrence to the whole of Europe. Are we talking about it?
In the French nuclear deterrence doctrine, which is always built on a form of ambiguity that makes it effective, we don't specify the criteria of our response. Otherwise, the enemy and the adversary are informed. But since the early 1960s, General de Gaulle indicated that there was a European dimension, and this has been gradually clarified, and I reinforced it a few years ago by mentioning it. And so I said, yes, there is a European dimension, in vital cases and assessed by the President, in order to be able to use nuclear weapons. Then I proposed opening a dialogue. Today, there are a few European countries that have an American gravitational bomb, which is a fairly dated piece of equipment, and can use it in a very limited way, as the idea behind it is that there is an American presence, and that's a good thing. And I say this very clearly. There is no alternative or choice to be made between Europe, France, the United States, and NATO. They are complementary, and I have been defending this idea of a European pillar within NATO for 7 years now. But what this treaty says is that, 1, there is stronger and more operational solidarity, and 2, beyond the European dimension of our deterrence, we will look together at ways and means to make this protection more concrete too.
Would that mean, for example, that French Rafales will fly in Poland?
That depends on your government, but the French government is willing to move forward on this path.
Did you mention that earlier? But is this treaty also clearly your response to the change in nature of our transatlantic treaty? Are you worried that the United States, if necessary, won't come to Europe's aid?
I think we must hope every day that the United States remains a reliable ally, committed to our side, both in defense and economic terms. So we must hope for this every day, and we must not give any excuse for it to be otherwise. But I note that they can sometimes be unpredictable and that they have interests that are no longer always aligned with ours. And besides, I don't have to judge or characterize them. That's just the way it is. And so they think the right answer to their trade imbalance is to impose tariffs that destabilize our economy and destabilize certain sectors: steel, aluminum, and the automobile industry. Now, we've heard about the taxes on the cinema industry, and on the other hand, when we have challenges that are important to us, they don't necessarily live up to the commitments they made. The uncoordinated withdrawal from Afghanistan, the decision more than 10 years ago in Syria to ultimately not go there, and today, uncertainty over Ukraine. So I'm doing everything I can every day to engage. A few hours ago, I was on the phone with President Trump to tell him that we're working together on a ceasefire, and we've coordinated with several partners in Northern Europe and the Baltic countries to achieve alignment. He released this important message on his support for the 30-day ceasefire, and now, with Prime Minister Tusk, Chancellor Merz, and Prime Minister Starmer, we really want to move forward on this. So we're committed, but we can't depend every day on American goodwill. And we can clearly see that they are increasingly saying America first, so to speak, and China second. It comes down to us, Europeans. We must put ourselves in a position to be more independent and therefore invest more in our defense, but not to buy off the shelf, to build our own European solutions. We must invest more in our energy. That's also part of our cooperation. Poland has committed to civil nuclear power. That's a very good thing. France is the leading civil nuclear power in Europe. Civil nuclear power is low-carbon energy that we produce on our soil. Civil nuclear power and renewable energy are two levers for decarbonization and sovereignty. It's much better than gas or coal. We import gas, and coal pollutes. And then we must move forward on common technological solutions. Everything we produce on European soil makes us stronger. It's this concept of independence, strategic autonomy, and European sovereignty that we're truly promoting together, that I've been fighting for 8 years.
But that will take time. And if, let's imagine, next week Donald Trump makes a decision, you often talk to him, you know the risk. But if he decides, for example, to withdraw American troops from Poland, what will France do in such a case?
In such a case, the Europeans will have to organize themselves to come and support Poland. We know, and I'll be very clear with you, what is the budgets for the United States' commitment. It represents roughly 30% of NATO's investment on Europe's eastern border. If Americans suddenly unplug everything, we can't compensate for everything overnight. It's true. On the other hand, we will organize ourselves. We will wake up. But what I see is that clarity gives strength, and it gives strength because it makes us make decisions faster, and it gives us more moral strength. And so, we don't have to be afraid of that, but we do have to organize ourselves. What is clear is that my recommendation is, let's not wait. Listen, 8 years ago, we had President Trump. Everyone buried their heads in the sand, saying it would pass, he would change. And anyway, it's only 4 years. The United States will come back. There is a consistency, and I'm not judging it yet. I am a great friend of the American people, of the United States of America and all. But the reality is that their interests are now less European than they were 10 years ago, 15 years ago, even less so than they were 20 years ago. And so, let's be clear. Yes, it will be a big problem if it happens next week, but we will face it. And I tell you very clearly, we will face it because Europe is strong. Let's stop doubting ourselves. Stop with our self-doubt. That's our main weakness. We make too many statements about doubting ourselves. Even if it happens, we'll organize ourselves. However, what we don't have the right to do is not face reality. We can't ask ourselves these questions in 5 to 10 years, because we know the probability has increased. And the mistake we made 10 years ago was probably telling ourselves it would never happen. Now we know. So, let's organize ourselves so that in 5 to 10 years, we can say to ourselves, it's great, the Americans are staying, but it doesn't matter if they leave.
And there, indeed, we're starting to move. But there's one issue that's stagnating, and that's the Ukrainian issue. You are the leader who's probably fighting the hardest in Europe for a just and lasting peace in Ukraine. But where are we at? We're at the current stage of the negotiations. Is that real?
First, I would have a lot of qualms about saying that I'm the leader who's fought the hardest for this issue in front of a Polish journalist. Because if there's one country that's done a lot, fought a lot, and taken the brunt of the burden, it is your country. And I say this with both great esteem and gratitude. The number of refugees you have welcomed is obviously the largest in Europe. And thank you for this effort. I know it's been a huge effort for the families and the Polish people, but also the consequences it's had on your agriculture, and that it's been very destabilizing. And then there's the tension on your border. So, if there is one country that's borne this burden, it's Poland. On the other hand, we are fighting, and we are fighting very closely with our British, Polish, German, and all European friends. There is also an extraordinary commitment from the Baltic countries, the Danes and the Swedes. The Norwegians, even though they are not in the EU, are extraordinary partners. And we are fighting to actually do what? First, try to achieve a ceasefire. The priority is a 30-day ceasefire. That was the agreement reached in March in Jeddah between Ukraine and the United States. Now they are saying the Russians must say yes. Not 3 days to entertain the public, so to speak, to celebrate May 9th and put on a show. No, 30 days. And so, that is my wish. President Trump yesterday made a very important gesture with his very clear message that in the coming hours and days, we will all come together to commit to a ceasefire and to say so if either side betrays it. Massive economic sanctions, and that we move forward to be much more dissuasive. Europeans and Americans united. That then, during this ceasefire, we build a robust and lasting peace. What does that mean? It means that the ceasefire is used to discuss territorial issues between the Russians and the Ukrainians, the most sensitive issues regarding certain cities, nuclear power plants, but also security guarantees. And when we talk about security guarantees, what does that mean specifically? What will the Ukrainian army of tomorrow be, and how can we all help to equip it, train and maintain it to be a reliable army that prevents Russia from attacking again the next day? And what security guarantees are we providing each other? Europeans, Americans, since they're not joining NATO, there is no consensus. What are we bringing that's more robust than what we committed to in Budapest several years ago? And so, is it a presence? Is it, in fact, a commitment that as soon as they're attacked, we'll deploy this or that equipment? All of that is up for discussion. It needs to be clarified. This is all the work we've been doing for weeks with the Ukrainians in a very close manner. But it will be part of the discussion. And the goal is, yes, to have this solid and lasting peace.
True. Is it still possible? The Americans promised to solve the problem in 24 hours, and 4 months later, Russia, with impunity, is still massacring Ukrainians.
Listen, first, you're right to say that Russia indeed enjoys impunity today, and it's the one that isn't doing what it says today. And to all those who believe that Russia wanted peace, it has clearly demonstrated that they were wrong. But the United States are committed itself. It did their utmost. It was perhaps a bit hasty, I would say, to say that everything can be resolved in 24 hours. I applaud the commitment of President Trump, his team, his administration, which nevertheless continues to be there. And the message he delivered yesterday demonstrates his commitment. And yesterday, President Trump spoke to President Zelensky, and I know he spoke to the Prime Minister of Norway. I spoke to him twice. So he remains engaged with all of us to move forward. So there is, if I may say so, daily communication. Sometimes there are setbacks, moments that can be shocking, etc. There is the reality of the work, and our role is to keep the United States engaged and to fight for this ceasefire that will allow us to build a lasting peace. Because we don't want a ceasefire that just freezes the situation. We know that doesn't work. That was the Minsk Agreement in 2014. That's what happened in Georgia in 2008. It's starting all over again.
And for these security guarantees, you proposed a European contingent. It's still on the table. France will send its soldiers. What role can Poland play, since it doesn't want to send its soldiers to Ukraine?
The first security guarantee is the Ukrainian army. Let's never forget that. Today, it is the largest army in Europe. It has about 1 million soldiers. It is the largest army in Europe. So it will be reduced because it will be coming out of mobilization. But our first task is how we enable Ukraine to have an army that remains at a very high level, that is well equipped, and that is trained. And we will all have to help with that. So that's the first security guarantee. The second is how we, in the event that this army is attacked or in difficulty, intervene. These are the second-tier guarantees, if I may say so. And this is where the Europeans must say, I commit to intervening or deployment, but not in large quantities, such and such a force or such and such capability, to somehow sign a presence, to show that I am there, as we did in other times in certain countries after 1945. So this is all that needs to be worked on, but it's not must, it's simply commitment.
Mr. President, we should be finishing soon, but I would like to know, returning to the treaty, will it survive political change in France and Poland?
The strength of what we must do in these times is to create something irreversible. People decide their future. And so, if tomorrow our people decide to have totally nationalist leaders who think it's better to fend for themselves and who no longer believe in any solidarity between nations or with Europe, perhaps they will be able to challenge it. And for that to happen, they will have to do a lot of political work and demonstrate to their people that it's better. I believe that what we are doing here is irreversible. And I think that what we are doing in the Treaty of Nancy is not only a treaty of friendship between our people, our countries, and our governments, but it creates something irreversible in the reunification of our Europe. Because it signifies the fact that Poland and France, at opposite ends of this European Union, two great people who have traversed a bloody history on their own paths, have a convergence of views on how to meet the geopolitical and security challenges, but also the climate and energy challenges, the economic and technological challenges. And that, I believe, has an irreversible character. And in a way, it seals the conditions, also irreversible, for a reunification of Europe. That's what I defended a few months ago in Bratislava. And that's what I believe in very deeply. I think it's the responsibility of our generation to ensure that there will never again be a division of this Europe. Because if we stand united from Porto to Kraków, there is little that can stop us. And I say it again, we don't sufficiently appreciate that this reunified Europe is more powerful than the United States of America. It's a larger market that knows how to manage greater diversity, has more technological centers, and is able to meet challenges. Our weakness is division and doubt. If we can resolve this, I can tell you that Europe can look far ahead because it has stability.
Si on sait régler ça, je peux vous dire l'Europe regardez loin devant parce qu'elle a la stabilité.
So you're optimistic?
I'm determined and optimistic. But optimism, you know, tomorrow won't happen by itself. It's up to us to build it.
Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you for this interview, for coming here. I know you were curious to know if there would be a Baba Aram.
Actually, I didn't know if there was any.
In Nancy, but there won't be any in Nancy. I served some to Chancellor Merz when he came for his first visit on Wednesday. And so it's a little nod to Franco-Polish friendship.
Precisely, because perhaps to explain to our viewers, it's a dessert that was somewhat invented by the Polish king, Stanisław Leszczyński, that after leaving Poland, came to Nancy and found this cake a little too hard. So he decided to water them to make them softer. Today, it's one of the favorite desserts on the French. I hope it's one of yours.
Yes, I confirm.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Once again, a special thanks to the President of the French Republic, Emmanuel Macron.
Merci à vous.
Thank you, and thank you to your viewers.